Good afternoon, everybody. I have just come back from Toronto. I was in Toronto for 2 days. My assistant is a great lover of science fiction, and I think sometimes that she really does believe in teleportation. So normally I would actually just speak from notes, but I've actually written something to help me, because I do feel a bit wobbly, so I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm reading something, but I really am. So just before I kick off, just a little bit about Creative England for those of you who don't know very much about us. Creative England celebrates its first anniversary next month. We're the first integrated development agency for the creative industries. We focus really on the screen industry, so film, television, games, interactive, digital media. And yes, we've been going for a year in October. We're funded by different government contracts, but we're not a Quango. That's a very important thing that you need to know. So, Richard asked me to speak about the challenges that those of you who teach creative and media subjects are facing, and particularly about employability. So I've put together a few thoughts and some examples of things that I think are quite interesting that I want to talk through. And I think we're going to have some questions and perhaps a time for a bit of a chat afterwards. Okay, so when I went to university in the mid-1980s, I don't recall that there were very many media studies degrees. Even if there were, I'm not sure I really would have gone for them. I began university studying literature, and then I changed to politics. I wish I could say truthfully that it was because I was a passionate, driven idealist, but that's not true. The reason I changed into politics was because there weren't enough boys studying literature, and there were lots of boys studying politics. And whilst I may have been very shallow and quite vacuous at the beginning of my university career, I think I hope I was mildly more reflective and erudite when I left. And I've always been a person of extreme, so when I left with my 2-1, I had a mission to change the world. And it seemed to me that the best way to do this was really through TV or radio. And so I tried to get a job on a training scheme, because in those days they existed, training schemes within television. And then I tried to get a job as a researcher, initially on radio. I failed completely. I had numerous interviews at the BBC, but I didn't get on any of them. And I ended up back at my old college, which is at Essex University, as a volunteer on a summer school. And the summer school was to encourage kids who came from what we called then disadvantaged backgrounds to have an informal taste of what it was like to go to university. And these kids were predominantly from parts of London which are probably quite fashionable now, but they weren't then, and whose parents and peers had no experience at all of a university education, like my own parents. And during that summer school, we made our own films, we made radio programmes, we wrote scripts together, we made TV programmes together, we made a record, and we played a hell of a lot of table tennis. Everything we did was based on the experiences of those young people, and it was the stories we told were told through their eyes. And this is really what excited me, and what gave me the impetus to not rely on getting a job, but to instead to find a way to make stuff myself. And so began my media career. I worked in a film workshop, helping other people to tell their stories, in an old disused garage in a rundown part of Colchester, which again isn't a particularly glamorous place to live, I can tell you. And I learned to do everything myself. I learned how to script, how to shoot, how to edit, interview, dub, how to cajole a reluctant contributor, how to blag-free film, and how to get it developed very cheaply, if not for free, and basically how to doorstep commissioning editors to get a meeting. And after that, I started to have some success in getting my own films actually commissioned and broadcast before moving on to Anglia TV, where I ran a long-running TV series which developed new talent for film and television. And then on to my 2 most recent jobs, which has followed really a similar interest, which is developing talent and developing businesses. But now I get paid better and I have better conditions, although not today. What I did then was relatively unusual, because most people got a job and then they got a career. However, I think my DIY story is probably the norm now. As a young person with hopefully something to say about the world, though often sometimes not, looking for a career in the media in 2012, you have to be prepared to do it yourself. You are entering an incredibly competitive, congested field, which doesn't pay particularly well in comparison to many other industries, which is demanding and exhausting. What is a potential employer going to be looking for from you? And what is it that universities could be doing to help you oblige? Well, let's start by thinking about your raw material, the 18 to 19-year-olds who are going to start taking their first tentative steps down your corridors later this month. They are part of a generation that's had a mobile phone glued to their hand for the last 7 years. Most of their movie watching has taken place online, probably illegally, and their best friend is Facebook. Hopefully these potential new students will have lots of ideas about the contribution they want to make to society and what they want in return. Are universities providing the right sort of education for these newbies, and are they capitalising on the opportunities for a deeper and a more thoughtful engagement with an industry that is naturally curious, collaborative, eager to learn and actually quite generous? Or are we stuck in a bit of a time warp, working in discipline silos to an agenda that became irrelevant years ago? Let's start our cogitation with a quick canter through the last few years of media development. And I've taken 10 years as an arbitrary starting point to do a compare and contrast. Some things are still the same. The highest rating TV shows in 2002 were EastEnders and Coronation Street at 14 million. And 5 years later, they're still EastEnders and Coronation Street, but now at around 10 million. And in the same week that I looked at in June 2012, they were the Jubilee celebrations, followed by EastEnders and Coronation Street at 7 to 8 million. So viewing figures have halved, but the British public continues its love affair with soap. In 2011, 4 of the top UK box office hits were 3D. Contrast this with the fact that in the 8 years between 2000 and 2010, only 2 3D films made any money at all. They were Up and Avatar, and both of those were released in 2009. The most popular social network site 5 years ago was MySpace, remember them? Facebook didn't take over MySpace as the go-to social network until 2008 and didn't turn cash positive until 2009. Twitter launched in 2006, and in its first year it had just over 1 million tweets. By March this year it had 140 million users and 340 million tweets a day. Its user base has grown by 40% between September of last year and March of this year. And the apps market, created by the invention of the smartphone, has grown from 0 to 17.5 billion in just under 4 years. And 5 years ago, Lehman Brothers was still a going concern, and 62% of people surveyed by YouGov for the Sunday Times thought that Gordon Brown was doing a brilliant job as our Prime Minister. What was the environment in the media skills and education world? Well, the film skills strategy, which was published in 2002 by the Sector Skills Council and the UK Film Council, had 1 mention of the word technology and 3 of the word digital. There was no national skills strategy for video games, with only a handful of courses in higher education. There were a small number of courses preparing students for our digital future, but in the main, most media education courses fell into 2 distinct camps. Those with an emphasis on production and the skills to produce and create, and those concerned with a theoretical approach, largely through textual analysis and discourse. What's different now? Well, thankfully, we've stopped talking about convergence. God, that's boring. It's finally here. Media is all pervasive and at the centre of our experience, whether at work, at home or at play. 10 years ago, media was prevalent, but the pervasive quality had not created the ubiquitous media culture we experience today. I'm sure you've heard this before, but Gil Scott-Heron declared that the revolution would not be televised. But as the fall of the Berlin Wall, the overthrow of Gaddafi and the Arab Spring have demonstrated, he was completely wrong. Understanding how to construct, use and distribute media is as much a core skill as reading, writing and arithmetic. And there used to be a clear distinction between those who reported the news, shot it, edited it, read it out on TV or radio and then distributed it to an audience. Now there isn't. Neither is there an enormous gulf between the professional and the non-professional. Not only are we all broadcasters and producers now, there are a whole set of new players in the market helping us to distribute and commercialise our output. When I first sat down to write this speech, I began by sending out a call on Twitter and LinkedIn, asking my very small band of followers and connections for their top tips on preparing young people for a career in the media. Here is a selection of the responses I received. Build resilience in relationships. Try to think multi-platform and learn how to run a business. be flexible and cooperative, ask for advice, listen and then act on it, and learn the rules and then break them. Then I called a couple of people who run quite large media companies spanning TV, film, animation and games. And in brief, what they said was that they looked for well-rounded, creative individuals who were able to adapt, self-motivate and learn. Increasingly, they wanted people who were confident with the architecture of technology and who understood how to work through systems and processes, and most importantly, work as a team. Truthfully, we don't know what specific skills we will need in the next 3 to 5 years. We don't know how new technologies are going to be exploited. As I've said, Twitter was only launched in 2006. How on earth could we have predicted its impact on marketing, on interaction with TV programmes? Did anyone predict the apps market would go from 0 to 17.5 billion in under 4 years? What we do know, however, is that media is a disruptor, that much innovation will be technology-led, that change is constant, and that connecting and communicating with other living beings is at the centre of what it means to be human. How this innovation manifests itself, how it's exploited and how you make money from it is less clear. What we are also better able to understand and therefore predict with more accuracy are the drivers of future trends. And this means we might be able to make a more educated assessment of the types of competencies that are needed. For example, and this may seem a little bit off the wall, but bear with me, the rising popularity of farmers' markets over the last 10 years, for me, was a demonstration that people were becoming far more concerned about the provenance of their food. It also demonstrated a shift in values. Many people wanted to make a contribution to their own local economies. And finally, it was a statement about taste and preferences. Lots of us were simply bored by the uniformity of the supermarket experience and out-of-town shopping. We wanted something with more love in it, bespoke, authentic and personal. But at the heart of this movement was an illustration of a series of much broader trends. The first is globalisation, accelerated by the ubiquity of media communication. I think one of the impacts of being online and connected 24/7 has made people feel far more conscious of the fragility of life, understanding how interdependent we all are and how important it is to protect oneself on a very basic level, and buying locally is a small step in helping to support one's own. The second is the rising cost of energy and high levels of debt. We've all needed to think about how to be better with our money and our resources. Remember the threat of Russia blocking gas supplies to the UK in 2009. There has been increasing concern about rising commodity prices and the fact that China is voraciously buying up raw materials and rare minerals across the world. These trends, globalisation, rising energy prices, commodity scarcity, high levels of debt, are all impacting our sector. I worry that media education is still perceived as largely focused on the entertainment business. It shouldn't be. The big opportunities for people with media skills will be in delivering healthcare via interactive media, education through gaming, and more services online. In a recent study for O2, the research organisation ResearchBods found that across all business sectors, companies expect 1/5 of their growth over the next 3 years to come through digital channels. I think one of the challenges facing media educators is to change the direction of our teaching away from transmit to one which understands that value is also in the receiving and interaction. In general, we've been teaching people how to construct, understand, critique, but in essence it's on a one-way transmit basis, crafting my story, my game, my news piece to you, the audience. Today's drivers, however, are far more social and interactive. We talk frequently about the pervasive nature of media and how it generates an ability for more personalisation. However, many of the products that we create are still fundamentally one-way and unresponsive. We need to incorporate this different approach into our teaching and learning, and we also need to recognise that we are educating people for a vastly different workplace, where media content and interaction is central to everyday work and life, and not the preserver of the entertainment business. In her recent McTaggart lecture, Elizabeth Murdoch talked about how digital platforms are translating audience trust into transactional relationships. And noting the rising success of YouTube, makes comparisons with MTV, which when it started out on a minuscule budget, kept programming costs very low by curating other people's content to build its audience and develop its voice. She captures a trend which I have seen developing over the last few years, though I'm not sure it's part of many curricula, which is the ascendancy of brands. whose budgets for moving image content are often far in excess of a broadcast commission. I remember talking to the owner of a very small production company several years ago, actually what used to be quite a big production company several years ago, who previously had a healthy business making documentary programmes for regional TV, BBC Two and BBC Four, but who found that they were actually getting better budgets and making more profit by producing branded content for charities than they were through any broadcast commission. Although her speech was aimed clearly at an audience of people concerned with TV, the themes are relevant across the piece to anyone with an interest in media. The thrust of much of Liz Murdoch's speech was about the need to put purpose at the centre of business and to put the connection with audiences at the heart of a media business. She describes Shine as a business that uses stories and content to build, attract and connect with communities. Brands have been doing this for a long time. The newcomers on the block, YouTube, Hulu, Netflix, are doing this, and our big employers in the sector are also beginning to understand that they need to be in this marketplace too. But has our approach in education recognised this? I'm not sure. The refrain, content will always be king, appears to me now slightly lazy. Yes, people will always seek great content, but the organisations delivering it to them are now leaders in the technology market, not the traditional bastions of our story factories. Have we adjusted our approach to take account of this? As our media culture moves from one of transmit to interact and connect, we will see a rise in co-creation and further collaboration. It's happening already in industry and startup incubators everywhere. I recently gave a talk in Sweden in a creative incubator which saw a jeweller working alongside an astrophysicist. Just look at what Helen Story has been doing with nanotechnologies in the design of new types of fabrics and the impact this is having on fashion and the environment. We're a very clubbable bunch in the creative industries. We love chatting to each other, but we have got to get out of our ghetto and start talking and working with others. What we need for the future are literate, numerate, problem-solving, technically and digitally literative, imaginative co-workers. We need people who know how to interact with others, who can listen and develop iteratively. We need workers who are design literate, who understand process, systems, criticism and elaboration. It is interesting that perhaps the world's best media lab, the one based at MIT in Boston, grew out of the School of Architecture, a profession where design thinking, form, content and context, creativity, artistry, engineering and physics combine. So I'd like to conclude by mentioning some of the industry and university partnerships that I think offer interesting approaches and models. I'm sure there are many others, and some of you may be cross if I've not mentioned ones you're familiar with or attached to, so apologies in advance. And I focused on these examples because I believe they represent a gold standard approach, but they also reflect some important developing trends. The first is literally down the road, the University College Arts Bournemouth, which has developed an impressive relationship with the visual effects company Framestore. There are about 40 graduates based at the Enterprise Pavilion working on Framestore projects. I had a long conversation with Sue Lister, Framestore's lead on the project. I couldn't get off the phone from her, frankly. She couldn't commend the partnership more highly. Her praise was fulsome. For Framestore, it's meant that they've solved an ongoing business problem, their desire to nurture their own talent so they don't need to outsource abroad. And it's also worked for students whose experience at the Framestore site in Bournemouth acts as a finishing school after their formal education. These students are now working on live Hollywood projects in a supported environment, building up not only experience and skills, but networks and connections to help them build a career. Abertay and Dundee is another example of an institution which puts a relationship with industry at the heart of its learning approach. Its incubator accelerator Whitespace helps individuals and teams work across disciplines whilst empowering the learners to direct their own learning. As well as the formal undergrad and postgrad courses, Abertay offers a series of other add-ons to increase value to a student's time there, and also increases the chances of graduates getting a job. One recent visitor to Whitespace told me you couldn't discern who was an undergrad, who was a postgrad, and who were running their own company, as everyone worked so seamlessly together. The particular strength of Abertay is its commitment to an interdisciplinary approach, which in my conversations with industry is a frequent comment. Most businesses would like a relationship across the board with universities, and not just one or two individuals who, when they move on, and results in the end of a working relationship with an institution. My own personal experience is that on some occasions I felt that the academic I've forged a relationship with has actually kept me away from others in the university, and it's been impossible therefore to build a strategic corporate relationship, which is always the result of people doing things together rather than a couple of people talking about doing things together. I think the National Film and TV School is a world-class institution, easily able to stand up to international scrutiny. You'll all be familiar with the learning and teaching there, but one new approach I'd like to mention is their new Creative Entrepreneurship programme. This is a 10-month business course which supports people to build, test and launch their own business proposal, taught by practitioners themselves and championed by business leaders such as Richard Branson and Patrick McKenna from Ingenious. The programme aims to develop students in both creative and business disciplines. Paul Mason of BBC Two's Newsnight produced a piece for the programme back in the late spring, early summer of this year, which looked at the workforce reality for many young people, and which he called Graduate Without a Future. With the unemployment of young people in the UK at 19%, the graduate without a future is a harsh reality. The market is simply not producing enough high-value jobs for young people leaving college. As their costs go up, loans, the cost of living, impossible house prices, they are also seeing international competition driving down wage levels and wage stagnation in the UK. What the NFTS course in entrepreneurship is doing, however, is addressing the increasing trend for people to do it for themselves, not to rely on a potential employer, but to learn how to create their own businesses and make money turning their own ideas into a commercial proposition. We will always need entrepreneurs, and for this reason I think the NFTS course, which is the first in Europe, is definitely onto a good thing. Finally, I'd like to mention two other organisations, Digipen and Hyper Island. Digipen is a Seattle-based college, now with outposts in Singapore, Bilbao and hopefully soon in Birmingham. And Hyper Island is a private Swedish company that offers a mixture of long-form and short-form training, education and professional development. Hyper Island has been established for 15 years and takes as its starting point a belief in real-world learning. All its programmes are attached to real-life creative commercial projects. Its guiding principles are 6. Learn for life, real-world ready, lead the change, seize your potential, team is everything, and change the world. As a précis of a manifesto for learning, I thought the ethos they described was pretty spot on. Their approach is for classroom learning to mirror the workplace, and all of their programmes include an internship within their global network of at least a third of the course time. Digipen is a more traditional higher education institute which offers BA, BSc and postgrad courses. And what's particularly interesting about Digipen is that the organisation was originally a computer simulation and animation company which moved into training and education because back in the early 1990s it was unable to source and recruit the right new entrants for its expanding work roster. Again, like Hyper Island, Digipen's links with industry are impressive. They have a special relationship with Nintendo which has developed over 20 years, and again, in parallel with Hyper Island, all of their students work closely on industry projects for most of their degree. There are some common themes linking these examples. The first is that all of these exemplars are intrinsically linked to industry, either through their visiting lecturers or through partnerships with businesses. For some of these institutions, their connections with a large number of employers has been nurtured and developed over years. The second theme is that they all combine an approach that marries the creative with business, whether it's through the environment they work in or the internships offered as part of the course. It's integral to their teaching approach. And all of these examples deal seriously with the progression of their students into work and have set up the systems to begin to this way before their final year. Finally, nearly all these examples are committed to an interdisciplinary approach and work across silos. This makes it easier for industry to work with them and more attractive to students, as well as being far more reflective of the real workplace. Here's a quote from the Digipen prospectus for a BA in games design. They say they're looking for students who are passionate about history, psychology and communications. Ideally, candidates should have a strong foundation in English composition and the fine arts, and candidates may find it helpful to complete mathematics up through pre-calculus prior to attending. This descriptor isn't very different to many of the conversations I had to employers prior to writing this address. As disruptive technologies impact business models, Employers want people who are going to adapt and grow with them. I'd also draw your attention to the fact that 2 of these companies operate in the private education market. Given the huge financial commitment that students and parents now have to make, I anticipate this trend will only increase. Many students will be factoring in a university's links with business in making their choice. After all, the end game for them is a job. This has huge implications for higher education institutions, who I'm sure are doing some very hard thinking about how they're going to remain competitive as this trend intensifies. I predict that the Digipen path, that of a media business turning itself into an education business, will quickly be adopted by UK-based media companies. So, in summary, here are some final thoughts on change and challenge in media education, and a couple of comments about how British universities might address some of the challenges I've covered. The first is that I would implore you all to collect, collate and publish your data on where your students go and what they do. In researching for this speech, I found it nigh on impossible to find out via your websites where your students went, how many went on to be employed in the sector and in what roles. My son is 15, and God willing, when we start helping him look at what his options might be for undergraduate study, you can bet it's one of the first things that I will be investigating. It's a buyer's market and there are a whole host of new competitors entering it. Secondly, I would suggest that you take seriously the implications of the fast pace of change and ensure that you work collaboratively as institutions across disciplines and nurture proper, decent relationships with businesses. Business relationships will be easier for some than others. If your institution is based in an area where there are lots of creative businesses such as London, Leeds or Manchester, you'll have an easier time of it than if you're in Lincoln, Preston or Swindon. However, there are other ways of developing a competitive edge, and I think that those universities who move to a multi or interdisciplinary approach, which they can do by leveraging more value from their university as a whole, will reap the benefits. I would urge universities to mirror the world they are seeking to prepare others to enter, one which is porous, partnership-based, interactive and responsive. It's also a world where we simply don't know how it's going to pan out. The best we can do, therefore, is to prepare people with a willingness to engage in lifelong learning, embrace disruption, adapt, and be creative. The Don Draper character in Mad Men is based on Draper Daniels, the creative head of the US advertising agency Leo Burnett. Leo Burnett was famous for the creation of Marlboro Man and a host of other brands. He famously said, "Curiosity about life in all its aspects is still the secret of great creative people." I think universities do a great job of developing and directing the curiosity of their students. Universities have fantastic resources, and all the evidence shows that our most creative centres have universities at the heart of them. However, frequently the dialogue is one-way and internal. I would urge you all to get out a little more. Talk to manufacturers, engineers, psychologists, technicians, collaborate with linguists, computer scientists and chemists. I'm sure you all have more in common than you think. Henry Ford said, "If I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said, faster horses." Sometimes we just don't know how to think outside the box and need others to help. The best innovation happens when you put people from different disciplines and backgrounds together. I believe successful creative businesses are fundamentally about the team. My challenge to you is to think a bit more broadly about who might be on your team. Thank you. I have to have a sugar rush now.
Any questions for Caroline? Time for a few questions. Carl,
thank you, Caroline. Yes, there's loads to think about how to get industry and universities together. And sort of what I find also here, and I remember we had that some time ago, there's sort of different hangouts, it seems, for university and academia and for people in the industry. I just wonder whether Creative England could play a role to create some platforms, events, where universities and businesses could meet up and sort of establish more common interests.
Yes, we obviously could. We have just finished a very small piece of work which has been funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, looking at trying to map the activity taking place between business and industry. And what we found is that there are lots and lots of networks but there is actually very little very little practical things happening in terms of research. Well, in terms of, I suppose, knowledge exchange between business and universities. So everybody talks about it, and there are lots of meetings of people networking, but there are very, very few examples of practical projects where it's actually happening and people are doing things together. So that's an area that we're looking at in terms of whether or not that's something we could facilitate. I think that the point I made in my speech, which is around working across a university rather than with a particular department, is the trick. Because quite often the networks become the preserve of a particular department. And what you as an employer are looking for is you're looking for a range of connections and a range of skills. And what you don't want to do is to have to navigate lots and lots of different departments. You're looking for the university to present itself as a corporate being, and that's one of the things I think is a challenge for you guys in terms of how you do that, without obviously losing the specialisms that each different department brings to it. But yes, definitely something we could look at.
Anyone else?
Well, I'm Ali Rashid from the University of London. Actually, they've started I'm sure you're aware of the Digital Fiction Factory.
Yes.
So they've started up in Line Pictures, Channel 4, BBC,
Yes.
a host of independent production companies, and a number of universities looking at how
Yes.
you can change storytelling. And I
Yes.
think that was quite an interesting forum that was devised primarily by the BBC and Line Pictures.
Yes. So we've just invested in something like 10 of those prototypes. Initially around ideas for CVBC and CBBS, and it's an interesting collection of for those people who don't know, Digital Fiction Factory is this collaboration between an independent production company and the BBC, and the purpose is really to grow the supply chain into the BBC by going through this trusted intermediary of Line Pictures, and they have about 200 SMEs as part of that group, and what Creative England are doing are investing in some of the prototype ideas. So it's we probably need to find a way of opening it up so that it's not quite so close to shop. But
the number of northern universities.
That's
They're
right.
involved in researching some of the aspects.
Yeah.
And some of the cutting edge sort of technology for storytelling.
Yes.
That's what they're doing up there.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Hi, you said at the beginning that you're not a Quango.
No.
Could you describe your business model, and B, do you plan to add any academics to your board?
So the business model is developing, I'd say. So the business model is that we have money for all the work we do in film, which is from the DCMS via the BFI, and then our money, and then the funds that we have to invest in things like Digital Fiction Factory has come through various contracts that we've won through the Department for Business, and then we have some European projects. So we've got a mixed funding business model. And in terms of whether or not we're going to add academics to our board, we had a lot of applications actually from academics, and we couldn't work out what was the best approach in terms of whether we should have somebody who was a computer scientist, a technologist, media, etc. So what we sort of parked it, and what we're thinking of doing is actually having a separate advisory group of academics, which would then represent lots of different disciplines, that we could then, and we would liaise with that advisory group. So that's our thinking. We haven't done anything in terms of actually working out or selecting we'll have to re-advertise, I think. But yes, there's something that I think what we don't want to do is to duplicate what is happening in lots of other places. We don't want to create another forum which becomes a talking shop. So we're thinking through it quite carefully at the moment. We did a session with the Judge Business School in Cambridge, actually looking at how we might structure that engagement.
And one last thing, I found you on Company's House. I'd just like to know,
Yeah.
Is there remuneration for your board?
Is there a remuneration? Our chairman is paid, and we have we obviously cover expenses, and I think for some of our there's an opportunity. I think if you're a freelancer, you'll be remunerated for doing additional work other than obviously turning up to board meetings. But on the whole, you know, our board is made up of people from the industry who are doing it really in order to, I hate to say the word put something back in, but that's how they would describe it. It all sounds a bit corny, but you know, they give a lot of their time very generously.
Hello, Mick Stockton, University of Teesside. Just a quick question. If we all agree that it's a good thing for industry and academia to work together, is there reticence on the part of industry or on academia because it's not happening as quickly as it should, or is it something else?
I think there's reticence on both sides. I mean, businesses, obviously their objective is to make money. So anything that takes them away from that core focus, you know, they'll do some sort of cost benefit analysis. And if they spend a lot of time talking and things don't happen, then it's going to put them off a further engagement, isn't it? And I think that it's quite hard as a business to find out how you work with a university. Similarly, with universities, you know, their core business is educating students, doing their research, etc., etc., etc. So I think that I think this is why it's important to work out what the offer is to business, and not so much to make sure there's a one-stop shop, because you don't actually want to work with lazy people. You want to work with curious people who are willing to do a bit of work. But I think that I think it's about putting yourself in the place of the business and thinking about what is it that they will want out of this relationship. Because my experience has been lots and lots of businesses do want to work with universities, but they just don't know how to. They really don't know how to. I think that's one of the things that we've been looking at in terms of what it is that we can do to facilitate it, which is why we've done this piece of research. And what we found were there were lots and lots of networks, but not a lot of examples of things actually being done, because there probably wasn't enough commitment on either part, you know, either side of the line, as it were, in terms of working out what the joint objectives were. And I think that's why the Framestore example is quite pertinent, really, because it's very clear what the benefit is for both parties. You know, it's Framestore very clear about why they're engaged in the partnership, I can't remember. You keep changing the name. University Arts College, Bournemouth, Pool Film School. I call it Pool Film School. Anyway, it was also very, very clear about what it wants. So and I think that's why it works.
Do you think, and just to add on to that, do you think there needs to be, if the timescale for university is around 3 years, and the timescale, as you already pointed out about industry, is 3 minutes, then is it necessary for people to start offering courses that say, well, this year I can tell you what we're going to be doing. We have no idea where you're going to end up in 3 years, but it's going to be where you need to be, rather than trying to create a roadmap that says what the delivery of the student will be at the end.
Okay, so I know bugger all, frankly, about, you know, how you design courses and curriculum and so on. But I would have thought that a university that has an ongoing relationship with industry and business provides some confidence to a student that there's an end game. Now, how you work that out internally, I don't know. But I think that uncertainty these days is just part of it all, isn't it? Actually, you don't necessarily need. I mean, maybe I'm not conservative enough. I don't know. I mean that with a small c. But I suppose personally, as a parent, I wouldn't necessarily want to see something that's mapped out 3 years. But I would want to have some confidence that the right things were in place to, you know, to help a student, help me on my journey.
And in which case, do you think it's important that the interaction with industry starts day one the student turns up?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the example of. That's why I've used the example of Hyper Island, and of Digipen. As soon as you start, you're attached to something, so you know what it's like. A friend of mine runs a quite successful animation company, and basically what he says. I mean, he recruits, I would say, 2/3 of their new staff on their latest productions come from abroad, so largely France and Germany, where they have much more of a sort of a master craftsman, student pupil relationship, and where people are being mentored. There's much more individual mentoring as part of the course, but they're working all the time on not just practical projects, but projects that belong in the marketplace. And what he says is that he finds with British students is that they're very, they're clear to some extent about their voice, but actually he doesn't want them to make, a feature film. He wants them to learn to get their head around making 60 episodes of 24 minutes for a Canadian market. And that's a very different mindset from somebody who's got this burning story to tell. Obviously you do need people who've got those burning stories, but you need to be realistic as well about the fact that's not going to be your first job.
Hello, I'm John Dovey from UE. Hi, Caroline.
Hello, John.
I'd just like to have a bit of a conversation about how you sell that vision to 17-year-olds. Because our core business is actually student bums on seats, and our core business is really, it's taken a 10% hit this year, and a lot of universities are really freaked out. And my intuition is that what goes on in the 17-year-old, 18-year-old market is that actually in the face of uncertainty, they actually become rather conservative. So rather than offering them a course that says, we don't know what's going to happen in year 3, they go, oh, could I do film, please? Could I study 19th century craft? Because we know what that is, So I just welcome other people's experiences of whether or not, how you might market that vision to a frightened 17-year-old filling out her UCAS form and her family, because that's actually what our market is.
Do you think that's what you think that sorry, what you're saying then, that you think people will want something broader? Because my experience, just again, anecdotally, is of more young people opting not to go actually into college, but to take apprenticeships or to look for courses which are going to get them into a job. And I think it's the job focus which is driving their decisions.
But there's still
my sense is that people are making more conservative choices about their education. I think that's the same thing. If they're thinking about a university degree as a way to just get a job, then they probably should be doing an apprenticeship, actually going somewhere else, because actually,
maybe
that's university degrees haven't actually been designed as an employment training program necessarily. So I think people are becoming more conservative. But actually, of course, I embrace your vision of what a program like that could be. But my intuition is it's been quite hard to sell it to young people because they don't understand the world of uncertainty that you and I inhabit on a daily basis. So, well, I don't see. Okay, so for instance, don't teach me I don't want to learn about social networking or Twitter, because actually that's what I do. That's my life. I don't want you lot telling me. I don't want to pay to go to university to learn this stuff that's actually my social life. You come across those kinds of ideas that actually the world which you and I regard as the basis of the creative economy, for them it's a taken for granted thing that doesn't constitute a university degree.
Yeah.
So you scare them off and tell them what it means.
Hello, Caroline.
Hello, hi.
Mark Reed here, hi. You just kind of started something to kind of answer something that I was thinking about, which was whether there is any other animating purpose behind media education other than preparation for a particular skill set, a particular set of requirements that employers actually can't articulate even. And that kind of list that you were coming up with, you were asking employers what they want: adaptability, flexibility, self-started, collaborative, building resilience and relationships. I was trying to match that with Don Draper, actually. It was quite interesting. Nothing about kind of a bit of a bullshit, a bit of a blowhard, a bit of a swagger, all that kind of stuff. But that's a kind of list of of abstract nouns, which are essentially content free. There's no real skill in there. And when John, when you mentioned the thing about kids wanting to come on and learn 19th century craft skills, actually, what they're saying is that there might be a value in learning a craft skill and kind of investing yourself in that kind of Richard Sennett thing of 10,000 hours of kind of apprenticeship in a craft skill, as gamers do. You know, that's essentially what kids do when they're gaming. And what Sennett says about people who develop craft skills through that is that they can then transfer that kind of embodied ability into learning other craft skills. So it means that maybe getting kids to learning video editing, getting kind of their hands on the stuff and making stuff is possibly, I think, is possibly more valuable. All the kind of stuff about adaptability and flexibility, which you can't teach essentially. It's very hard to teach that. That can be developed. There are attributes that can be developed. But I'm just wanting to kind of stand up for content a little bit and stand up for kind of real skills of making things and being because they're important to themselves, but they're also they develop that ability to transfer them out into learning other kinds of skill. Does that make any sense?
James Cheif from Staffordshire University. I was just wondering whether or not we're to some extent kind of coming into competition with one another between universities and industry anyway, because from the experience I'm seeing, a lot of the time, because industry can't offer kind of long-term continuous employment for our graduates, the universities have started to spin out companies. We've created our own companies. We're generating a lot of content of our own, which is all being done cost neutrally because it's been done as part of the course, and then they're starting up YouTube channels that are attracting a lot more hits and a lot of other advertisers again. So there's an element of, well, the universities are going to want to sort of migrate into doing the business for themselves anyway. Certainly that's the experience that we've seen within our own university, and that the connections to businesses that we have started to do and we've started to set up are a lot more precarious, just because of the nature of you can't tell whether or not the business is still going to be there in 6 months' time.
Yeah.
So I just wonder whether or not there were any thoughts on that from Creative England's point of view as to whether or not incubation spaces within universities to create longer term employment opportunities after they've sort of finished their courses, as opposed to this sort of us trying to turn out people for an industry that can't make a promise on what they can give them after the tenure.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I can give a Creative England point of view. I can give you my my response, which is that I think that what you've described is an example of what I was sort of referring to earlier, which is that particularly in places where there aren't an awful lot of creative businesses, you have to work, 10 times harder than you do if you're in this, if you're in London, for example. And those colleges that have supported environments such as incubators or accelerator programs or investment programs that run alongside it, what you're seeing is that they're developing them as an add-on to what they're offering within the university. But what that is leading to is much more in terms of a ripple effect around their city or their town, simply because there wasn't anything there before. I think it's quite interesting that Bournemouth and Poole have had these two fantastic media schools for some time now. I don't know how old Poole Film School has been here for, but a lot. I remember it 25, 30 years ago. But despite turning out fantastic students, Bournemouth didn't have a massive or even a significant cluster of media businesses. But with the building of the Enterprise Centre and the location of Framestore, you can see that there's much more of an engine now to create more value and to create a great opportunity to keep students and to help them set up their own businesses because that supported environment has been provided. So I think that's you're right. There's a movement both ways, both from businesses into education, from education into businesses. But I really mean what I say about media businesses moving into this market, and I do think there'll still a lot of students. I'm already talking to a couple of them who've come to us about not insignificant programs of a year, 2 years, and I think that they'll move very, very quickly.
Carl Schoenfeld from Raindance. I just wanted to trace that trajectory we had early on from this idea that business and industry is about making money, and then we've already identified that it's not only like the Framestore example, so there are actually considerable overlap between industry and academia in terms of talent development, like the Framestore example illustrates. And I do remember that the regional screen agencies before Creative England, they also did a lot about talent development with regional digital short schemes. So I was wondering, in terms of exploring how we can bring the industry into the university, wouldn't it be possible perhaps to set these schemes up at universities maybe over summer when not many people use the equipment there, and therefore save some money, bring industry experts into the universities, sort of who can work with students there, in order to facilitate that coming together of university and industry?
Yes, I'm trying to think of some examples, but I think that lots of times you don't really need, people are doing stuff anyway. I think that hopefully most people who want a career in film and television are using the technology that they have already to make their own short films. So it's not so much that they're not making them; it's more about distributing them to an audience and understanding what that entails, and engaging in a critique and a discussion about them. One of the problems with a lot of my experience of which is extensive in terms of short film. I mean, we developed at First Take Films. We must have developed, about 100 different short films, and we made about 60 or 70 over a 3-year period. What was interesting is that the filmmakers were very keen to talk and work on their own short, but they didn't really ever sit down and watch anybody else's, and they didn't really get engaged in a. I mean, that's probably a bit harsh, but I was expecting an awful lot more discussion and debate about the form in itself, and I think it's creating the environment for that to happen. So something like Encounters, which is a short.
Couldn't you ask universities then, just building on that, couldn't you ask universities saying, hey, we've got a problem here, can you help us?
Well, you can, and I
facilitating that professional dialogue.
You can.
Which our talent can grow.
You can, but I'll just give you again an example. So we've got the Encounter Short Film Festival, which is one of the best short film festivals in the world, taking place. I think it starts next week in Bristol. I know the director of that very, very well, and she's a very, very able person, and she's a brilliant persuader and a blagger. But there's no, there are bits and bobs of university money in it, I'm sure, but there isn't that sort of strategic partnership that you're talking about. There are all sorts of similar festivals, maybe not quite on that scale, all around the country. But I don't see lots of universities knocking at the doors saying, can we do this? So I think yes, there is an opportunity, but I think it's sorry.
Rain Dance is open.
Okay.
Picking up what you were saying about collaboration, really, which I do think you're right, it's the way forward. You mentioned before this idea of universities starting to do what business does and business doing what universities do. I think that for me, sorry, I should come from Teesside University. For me, very much, the answer is working together. It is about collaboration. So we accredit the Hyper Island MA, and it's been a very, very interesting experience, because we took the view, look, you know what you're doing with this stuff, you do this very well, why would we compete with that, why wouldn't we work with you?
Yeah.
So they developed what had been their programme into an MA, we accredit that. What's very interesting is how much more input Hyper Islands need from the university than they ever thought they would, because what they realised was actually we don't really know how to do an MA. So in fact that partnership, I mean that's an incredibly valuable partnership, because they bring a load of stuff that we can't possibly compete with, but equally they need us. So, and that works extremely well. And I do think that kind of partnership, rather than sort of getting phobic about what other people are doing, is the way forward.
I think you're right, and I think it's not until you actually start doing it that you understand what it is that you don't know. So again, business is naturally quite conservative. So it's actually making those first steps together to set up a dialogue where there is some trust, and there are some human connections, and it's then that you can then see, well, actually this is something we didn't know that we didn't know this, if you like.
Last question.
Hi, John Mateer from the University of York. One of my areas of interest in research is academic industry collaboration formally, and I've been looking at programs worldwide, particularly with regard to feature film collaborations between academia and industry. And there's a lot going on, more than people probably realize. But one of the things that I've found when I've been looking at UK programs is that there's a lot of secrecy. People don't want to talk about it because this is a comparatively small country. There are comparatively limited numbers of production companies. So how can, or what can be done through Creative England or other means to enable universities to have academic partnerships while not being strictly in competition with each other, which doesn't benefit either particularly the university or the industry as a whole, because that way the people aren't coming in to have these collaborations and so forth. Does that make sense?
What do you mean in terms of secrecy?
I've contacted a number of institutions that I won't name about their involvement with industry with regard to how they're working with industry for either placements or indeed full collaborations on film projects and so forth.
Yeah.
And they don't want to talk about it because they can see that as competitive secret. They see that as they've taken a lot of time, and I can understand this view to a certain degree, a lot of time to set up that relationship with that industrial partner that they then feel gives them a competitive advantage in recruitment and so forth, potentially revenue. And so you have these kind of two things working against each other, because on the one hand, academia and higher education is set up on this notion of exchanging best practice and helping everyone go forward. So collectively, we all benefit both in terms of research and helping the students and subsequently helping industry. Yet there's this competitive pressure because we are dealing with industry, and industry is inherently competitive, and there are only so many partners potentially for universities, that there's this kind of clash.
Yeah.
Do you see any way of reconciling that problem?
Oh gosh. Do I see any? Oh, I don't know. Further up the food chain is what I always say, but I think it comes down to a sort of a corporate sensibility, really, doesn't it? And how you change that. I don't know. I mean, I'm again, from my experience, a lot of the businesses I did ring around a lot of friends and a lot of people I've worked with before writing this, because it was a bit scary. Normally I stand up and blather along, but I just thought academics can't do that. You've got to make sure that all your facts are right, and and they all said that in the relationships that they'd had with academic departments, they did feel very much that they were sort of owned and they didn't like it. And I think if businesses don't like it, then somehow or other something will change. Not if businesses, it's not about businesses not liking it, but if there is that dysfunction, at some point it will out. But I suppose it all goes back to changing the corporate culture and to changing the culture as a group of institutions working together. I mean, I think there are examples of, for example, we're doing some work with, and I'm not across the detail of this, but I think it's called FIRM, which is it's a collection of universities in the north, and the reason that we're doing that is because we wanted to have not just go through one gateway. Well, and I think you'll see, the more and more that universities club together and try and work collegiately, the better that is for anyone who wants to interact with them. And then also hopefully you can create a culture where it may not be to everybody's advantage all the time, but some of the time it will be to a group within that group to collaborate. So it's how you create an infrastructure or mechanisms that encourage that. I don't know. It's usually about getting a few people together who share that vision and want to do something about it. That isn't a particularly satisfactory answer, I realise, but I don't have a silver bullet, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much indeed. Fantastic. Thank you.